The colony's central square was crowded, filled with the sound of voices, footsteps, and vendors calling out their goods. Humans and aliens moved between the stalls, exchanging items, haggling over prices, and sharing food. Life looked normal, but beneath the noise was an unspoken tension, a fragile peace that always felt ready to break. It was in this restless place that the widow appeared. Her tall frame stood out, her silver-toned skin glimmering under the artificial lights of the settlement. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes wild with urgency. She pushed through the crowd, her voice rising above the chatter. "They are coming," she cried. "Can't you see? Don't you understand? The danger is already here." Heads turned. Some faces showed confusion, some annoyance. A few laughed, shaking their heads as though she were a familiar nuisance. The widow had shouted warnings before, and most people had learned to ignore her. Since her husband's mysterious death, she had been called unstable, broken by grief. But today, her words had a sharpness, a fear that could not be faked. Even those who mocked her paused for a moment to listen. She continued, her voice cracking as she pointed toward the distant skies. "They will strike when the stars hide. At night they will come, and your homes will burn. Your children will not be safe. The council hides the truth from you." The crowd stirred uneasily. Some people murmured to one another, asking if she had lost her mind again. Others whispered that maybe she had seen something the rest of them had not. But before her voice could reach further, soldiers pushed through the people, their boots heavy against the metal ground. "Not again," one of them muttered. "This woman never learns." The widow tried to pull away, but two soldiers caught her arms. Another pulled out a rough sack made of coarse fabric. Without hesitation, he forced it over her head, muffling her words into cries that no one could understand. She struggled, kicking against the soldiers, but her voice was only broken sounds now. "Quiet her down," the officer ordered. "The council doesn't want panic." The marketplace, moments ago filled with her shouts, fell into an awkward silence. People stood still, watching as the soldiers dragged her away like a criminal. A few shook their heads and muttered that she deserved it. Others lowered their eyes, unwilling to get involved. Among the crowd was a young human worker. His clothes were worn, his hands rough from labor in the factories. He had seen her before, walking alone along the edges of the settlement, muttering words that no one cared to hear. He had never thought much of her, but this time something about her voice struck him deeply. As the soldiers pulled her through the square, she twisted and shouted one last time before the sack fully smothered her words. "They are already among us. You blind fools. They are already here." The worker froze. The words echoed in his chest, heavy and unsettling. He watched as the soldiers dragged her away, disappearing into the side streets. Slowly, the square returned to its normal sounds, vendors shouting again, children running once more. But the worker could not shake the widow's voice. That night, in his small quarters near the industrial zone, he lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, her wide eyes filled with terror. He remembered the way she screamed those words, not like a liar but like someone desperate to be believed. He told himself it was nonsense. The council had declared her unstable long ago. People whispered that she had lost her mind after her husband died, that grief had broken her. It was easier to believe that than to consider her warnings might be true. But the worker's mind refused to settle. 2 nights before, while repairing a machine late in the factory, he had heard something strange on the radio channels. A burst of static followed by a few broken words. He hadn't understood them, but there had been urgency in that signal, like a warning. At the time, he brushed it off. Now, remembering the widow's words, he realized they were almost the same. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding. Could she have heard the same signal? Was that why she shouted in the square today? If she was lying, why silence her so brutally? And if she was telling the truth, why wasn't anyone listening? The worker looked out the small window. The stars beyond the colony dome shone quietly, but even their light seemed suspicious now. The widow's voice echoed again in his head. They are already among us. The thought chilled him. Maybe she was mad. Or maybe she was the only one brave enough to speak the truth. He lay back down, restless and uneasy, knowing this was not the last time he would hear her cries. Something was wrong in the colony. Something no one else wanted to believe. And the only person warning them was the woman everyone called crazy. The young worker woke before dawn, though his body begged for more sleep. The factory whistle had not yet sounded, but his mind refused to rest. The memory of the widow's cries still played in his ears. Even now, he could picture her being dragged across the square, the sack pulled tightly over her head, her voice muffled but her fear still sharp. He sat at the small table in his room, staring at the cold metal surface. A stale piece of bread sat untouched before him. His hands, rough from years of labor, tapped nervously against the table. No matter how he tried, he could not push away her words. They are already among us. He whispered it aloud, testing the sound. The words filled the empty room, making it feel colder than before. He shook his head, trying to laugh at himself. It was madness, he told himself. Just the wild thoughts of a grieving woman. That was what everyone said. But deep down, he could not believe she was simply insane. On his way to the factory that morning, the colony streets felt different. The buildings were the same, metal walls, dim lights, cracked signs. But something in the air carried a strange weight. People moved about quickly, eyes lowered, avoiding conversation. The widow's public outburst had clearly unsettled many, though no one dared speak of it openly. As he walked, he overheard two merchants whispering behind their stall. "She's dangerous," one hissed. "She's broken," the other replied. "If we listen to her, the whole colony will fall into panic." The worker slowed his steps, listening carefully. They spoke with fear but also with doubt. Not everyone was fully convinced she was mad. That thought made his heart beat faster. At the factory, machines roared and smoke filled the air. He threw himself into his tasks, trying to lose his thoughts in the rhythm of labor. But it was impossible. Every spark from the welding torch reminded him of her warnings of fire. Every rumble of the heavy machines felt like distant footsteps of something approaching. During the midday break, he sat alone, his food untouched again. Two of his coworkers joined a nearby table. He heard them talking about her too. "They should have locked her up long ago," one said. "Did you hear what she shouted?" The other replied. "She said the council is hiding something. That's dangerous talk." The first man lowered his voice. "Maybe she knows more than she should. Maybe her husband found out something before he died." The worker leaned forward, listening closely. His chest tightened at those words. So he wasn't the only one thinking there might be truth behind her warnings. Still, the others laughed it off quickly, brushing it away like dust. People were too afraid to think deeper. By evening, the worker's head was heavy with questions. He returned to his quarters, but instead of lying down, he pulled out the old radio receiver he kept by his bedside. It was battered and scratched, a tool he had salvaged long ago. He switched it on, the machine crackling with static. He turned the dial slowly, his heart thudding in his chest. For a long while, there was nothing but the hiss of empty air. Then, faintly, he heard a broken signal. A voice, distorted, almost impossible to understand. It was not human. The sound crawled through the static like a whisper from another world. His hands trembled as he leaned closer. The signal cut out as suddenly as it had come. Silence filled the room again. He sat back, breathless. The memory of the widow's cries returned stronger now. Her words, her warning, her terror. Could it be that she had heard this same signal? Could that be why she shouted in the square? He rubbed his face with his hands, torn between fear and curiosity. If he told anyone, they would laugh at him or worse, report him to the council. But if he ignored it and she was right, then the whole colony could be in danger. That night, sleep came in short, broken moments. Each time he drifted off, he dreamed of shadows moving in the streets, of stars exploding above the dome, of the widow's voice screaming through the dark. By morning, he made a choice. He could not stay silent anymore. He had to know the truth. The next day, instead of going directly to the factory, he walked toward the side of the colony where the soldiers had dragged her away. Few people went there. The buildings were older, falling apart, with shadows pooling in every corner. His steps echoed against the walls, his heart pounding louder with each one. He did not know what he was hoping to find. Maybe the soldiers had already taken her far away. Maybe she was locked in some cell or worse. But he knew he could not turn back now. He had seen something in her eyes that refused to leave him. And somewhere deep inside, he felt certain her warning was not madness. It was truth. The worker walked through the narrow streets of the old colony sector, his boots crunching against broken tiles. The air here was damp and heavy, filled with the smell of rust and decay. Few people lived in this part of the settlement anymore. The lights above flickered weakly, and shadows stretched across the walls like long fingers. He knew this was where the soldiers had dragged the widow the day before. He didn't know why he had come here, but his heart told him he needed answers. Each step brought back the sound of her muffled screams. Each corner made him wonder if she was still alive. His mind returned again and again to the strange signal he had heard on his radio. That distorted voice, slipping through the static, had felt almost like a whisper meant only for him. It had lasted only seconds, but it had shaken him more than any sound in his life. And when he matched it with the widow's words, the connection seemed undeniable. He stopped near a crumbling building. A soldier stood nearby, smoking in the dim light. The worker quickly turned down another path, not wanting to be seen. If the council knew he was snooping around, they might take him too. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. Memories stirred, memories of his late-night shifts in the factory, when the radio was his only company. He remembered the moment he had first heard that broken transmission. It had been sharp, urgent, filled with a warning he couldn't understand. At the time, he brushed it aside, thinking it was some distant interference. But now, with the widow's cries fresh in his mind, the memory refused to fade. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. He ducked into a dark alley, holding his breath. Two soldiers passed, speaking in low voices. "She won't last long without food," one said. "The council doesn't care," the other replied. "They want people to forget her." The worker's stomach twisted. So she was alive, locked away somewhere, left to starve. His hands clenched into fists. He told himself he should walk away, that it was not his fight. But deep inside, he knew he couldn't. That night, back in his quarters, he sat once again by the radio. He turned the dials carefully, waiting for the voice to return. Hours passed with nothing but static. His eyes grew heavy, his head resting against the table. Then, suddenly, the signal returned. It was faint, broken, but clearer than before. A voice, alien, urgent, almost desperate, spoke through the static. He could not understand the words, but he felt the meaning. A warning, a threat, a call for danger already near. His breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer, his ears straining to catch every sound. Then the signal vanished, leaving only silence. He sat back in his chair, his chest pounding. The widow had not lied. She had heard this too. Maybe she understood it better than he did. Maybe that was why she shouted so wildly in the square. Sleep was impossible. He paced his small room, the floor creaking beneath his steps. If he told anyone, they would laugh or worse, report him. But if he stayed silent, what if the danger came true? By dawn, he made a decision. He would find her. He returned to the old sector, moving carefully, avoiding soldiers. He watched their patrols, memorizing their routes. Finally, he found the building where they kept her. The windows were barred, the door guarded. He hid in the shadows, waiting, his heart racing like a drum. Hours passed. The guard at the door grew tired, stepping away to relieve himself. The worker seized the moment. He slipped through a narrow gap in the wall, crawling through dust and debris until he found a small opening inside. The room was dark, the air stale, and then he heard it. A faint cough, followed by a weak voice. "Is someone there?" He froze. The widow's voice was thin, trembling, but unmistakable. He stepped closer, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. She sat chained to the wall, the coarse sack still over her head. Her body was frail, her movements weak. For a moment he could not speak. Then finally, he whispered, "I heard the signal." She lifted her head slightly, though the sack covered her face. Her voice cracked with desperation. "You heard it too? Then you know I am not mad." He swallowed hard, fear and resolve mixing inside him. "Tell me what it means." Her voice shook, but it carried a sharp edge of truth. "It means the enemy is close. Closer than anyone dares believe." The worker's heart pounded harder. He had found her. He had found the truth. But now he also knew he was in far more danger than he ever imagined. The room smelled of rust and damp air. Dust floated slowly in the thin light that slipped through a crack in the wall. The worker stood frozen, his chest tight as he looked at the figure chained to the wall. The widow sat slumped forward, her wrists bound by metal cuffs, her head still covered with the coarse sack. Her breathing was shallow, broken by weak coughs. He hesitated. If anyone found him here, it would mean punishment or worse. Yet he couldn't bring himself to leave. Something about her presence, even in this broken state, carried weight. She was not mad. He could feel it in the way her trembling voice carried truth. "Take it off," she whispered, her voice rough from thirst. "Please, I can't breathe." The worker's hands shook as he reached out. He pulled the sack away, and the widow's face was revealed. Her silver-toned skin was pale, her lips cracked, her eyes sunken but still burning with intensity. The sight struck him. Even weak and starving, her gaze held fire. "You're real," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You heard the signal. You know I am not lying." He nodded slowly, his throat dry. "I heard something. I don't know what it was. But I know it wasn't normal." The widow closed her eyes, leaning back against the cold wall. "They silenced me because I know too much. My husband. He discovered the truth before they killed him." Her words sank deep into the worker's chest. He lowered himself to the ground, sitting across from her. "Killed? They said he died of sickness." She gave a bitter smile. "That's what they want you to believe. He worked as a technician for the outer scans. He intercepted their transmissions, the same ones you've heard. He recorded proof. He told the council, but instead of protecting the people, they silenced him. And when he refused to stop, they made sure he never came home." The worker's fists tightened. His heart raced, anger mixing with fear. "And now they've locked you away, so no one listens." "Yes," she whispered. "If I speak, they call me mad. If I fight, they beat me down. If I stay silent, they win. But the danger does not wait. The enemy fleet hides in the dark of space. They are closer every day. And when they strike, no one will be ready." The worker looked toward the barred window, the shadows of soldiers passing faintly outside. His mind battled with itself. If what she said was true, then everyone in the colony was in danger. But if he believed her, it meant going against the council, against the soldiers, against the order that ruled their lives. His voice trembled as he asked, "Why should I believe you?" The widow's eyes sharpened, her voice steady despite her weakness. "Because you already do. If you didn't, you wouldn't be here." The words pierced him. He realized she was right. Something inside him had pushed him here, something stronger than fear. He wanted answers, and she was the only one who had them. "I can't do this alone," she continued. "My husband hid the recordings, the proof. But I don't know where the soldiers placed them after they raided our home. If you can find them, we can show the people. Once they see the truth, they won't call me mad anymore." The worker's breath grew heavier. A dangerous task, sneaking past soldiers and breaking into guarded places. If he failed, he would vanish just like her husband. But when he looked into her tired eyes, he saw not madness but determination. She wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for all of them. He stood, pacing the room, his hands shaking. "If they catch me." "They will," she interrupted softly. "That is their way. But if no one acts, then we are already lost." Her words settled like iron in his chest. The choice was simple yet impossible. Risk everything, or stay silent and let destruction fall. He moved closer, lowering his voice. If I help you, what then? Then, she whispered, we fight to be heard, even if it kills us. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The worker's mind raced, weighing fear against truth. Then he finally nodded. Tell me what to do. The widow's lips curved into the faintest smile, fragile but filled with hope. First, free me. Then we find the recordings. And then, we show them what they fear most. Evidence that cannot be denied. The worker pulled at her chains, his fingers searching for the lock. It was old, rusted, but strong. His hands ached as he tugged. At last, the sound of metal snapping echoed faintly in the room. The widow's wrists fell free, red and bruised. She winced, but her eyes glowed brighter now. You've taken the first step, she said softly. There's no turning back. The worker's stomach tightened. Outside, the sound of footsteps echoed closer. He quickly pulled the sack back over her head and slipped into the shadows of the room. The soldiers passed without entering, their voices drifting away. Only then did he step out again, pulling the sack off once more. The widow gave him a look of gratitude mixed with sorrow. He knew then that his life would never return to what it was. By freeing her, he had chained himself to her fate, and the truth waiting in the dark would either save them or destroy them all. The night outside was quiet, but the worker felt the weight of 100 eyes on him as he guided the widow through the shadows. She moved slowly, her legs weak after being chained for so long. Every few steps she stumbled, and he caught her arm, pulling her close so they both would stay hidden. Stay low, he whispered. The soldiers are still near. She nodded, her breath shallow. The sack no longer covered her face, but the bruises on her wrists and the hollow look in her eyes made her appear like a ghost wandering through the broken alleys. Yet even in her weakness, she carried herself with dignity, her gaze sharp whenever she spoke. They do not know yet that I am gone, she murmured. But when they discover it, they will hunt us. We must move quickly. The worker's mind raced. He had never broken a single rule in his life before this night. He had always kept his head down, worked his shifts, and avoided the eyes of the council. But now, with each step, he knew there was no return to that old life. They reached the edge of the old sector, where the buildings gave way to storage units and abandoned docks. Here, the lights were dim and few people passed by. The widow leaned against a wall to rest, her voice dropping lower. My husband hid the recordings in a place they would never expect, she said. But when the soldiers took him, they searched our home. I do not know if the evidence is still there or if they moved it. The worker frowned. What exactly is on these recordings? Her eyes burned with intensity. Proof of transmissions from the enemy. Their plans, their movements, their strategy. My husband intercepted them. He saved everything. It was his life's work. And it cost him that life. The worker's stomach tightened. If such evidence existed, then everything the council told the people was a lie. They knew the danger and chose silence. Worse, they let the people believe the widow was mad to keep the truth buried. The widow's voice softened, trembling with emotion. He died for trying to protect them, and they call me insane for carrying his truth. The worker clenched his fists. He had always felt powerless in this colony, just another hand in the endless machine of labor. But now he realized he held something the soldiers feared, knowledge. As they moved again, the worker noticed something strange. A man stood across the street watching them. His face was hidden in the shadow, but the way he lingered made the worker's skin crawl. He quickly guided the widow down another path, his heart racing. They are already among us, she whispered, echoing her warning from before. Not all who wear the face of a friend are truly human. Her words sent a chill through him. He glanced back. The man was gone. They reached her old home at last. A small, broken house on the far edge of the colony. The door hung crooked, and the windows were shattered. Inside, dust covered the floor, and broken furniture lay scattered. The soldiers had already torn the place apart. The widow moved through the wreckage slowly, her eyes searching. "He hid it well," she said softly. "He always knew they might come for him." The worker helped her lift pieces of broken furniture, shifting debris aside. Hours seemed to pass as they searched. Then, finally, the widow pressed her hand against a loose panel in the floor. With effort, she pulled it free. Beneath it was a small metal box. She opened it, and inside lay a set of old data chips, scratched but still intact. Her hands trembled as she held them. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the truth they fear." The worker leaned closer, staring at the chips. "If we show this to the people, they will know I was not lying," she finished. "They will see the enemy for what they are. But we must be careful. If the council learns we have this, they will kill us before dawn." Suddenly, a sound came from outside, a soft shuffle of boots. The worker froze. He peered through the broken window and saw shadows moving. "Soldiers. They've already found us," he hissed. The widow clutched the box tightly, her face pale but steady. "We cannot let them take it. This is all that remains of him. All that can save us." The worker's mind raced. They were trapped in a broken house with no easy escape. But the fire in the widow's eyes gave him strength. She was weak in body, but her will was iron. "Follow me," he whispered, pulling her toward the back. There was a narrow path that led between two collapsed walls. If they moved quickly, they could slip out before the soldiers surrounded them. As they crept through the rubble, he heard the soldiers breaking down the front door, their voices sharp and angry. Dust filled the air as boots stormed in. The worker pulled the widow into the shadows outside, his heart pounding like a drum. They ran through the night, the box clutched tight in her hands. Behind them, the soldiers shouted, their lights sweeping through the ruins. But ahead, the streets stretched empty and silent. The widow spoke through heavy breaths. "Now you see, they will not stop. They fear the truth more than death itself." The worker nodded, his fear hardening into resolve. "Then we'll make sure the truth reaches everyone." For the first time, he felt the weight of the enemy not just beyond the stars but within the very colony itself. And he knew the fight for survival had already begun. The worker and the widow moved through the dark alleys, their steps quick but careful. The night was silent, but the silence felt heavy, like it was watching them. Every shadow looked like a soldier waiting to strike. Every sound made their hearts pound harder. The widow still clutched the small metal box to her chest. Inside it were the data chips, proof of the enemy, proof of her husband's sacrifice, proof that the council had lied. The worker glanced at her pale face and saw the way her hands trembled. Yet her eyes carried no fear now, only determination. They reached a quiet corner near the old water pumps. The worker pulled her into the shadows and whispered, "We can't run forever. They'll keep hunting us." The widow nodded slowly. "That is true. But the question is, do we hide or do we fight?" The worker leaned against the cold wall, his breath sharp in the night air. He had spent his whole life avoiding trouble, keeping his head down, doing his job in silence. He was not a soldier. He was not a leader. But now, with the widow beside him, he held a choice far bigger than himself. "If we show the people," he whispered, "the council will come for us. They'll call us traitors. They'll crush us before anyone believes." The widow looked at him, her voice steady. "And if we stay silent, everyone dies without ever knowing why. The enemy won't ask permission. They'll strike when no one is ready." The worker's chest tightened. He thought of the crowded market, the laughing children, the families who worked and dreamed inside the colony walls. He thought of the widow's voice echoing across the square, silenced under the sack. And he thought of his own life, small, ordinary, but now pulled into something far greater. He looked at the box. The decision weighed heavy on him, crushing in its simplicity. Hide or reveal, silence or truth, fear or courage. Finally, he spoke. "We can't do this alone. We need someone who can help us spread it. Someone people will listen to." The widow gave a tired smile. "You are wiser than you think. But who will listen? The council controls the voices. The soldiers control the streets. To show the truth, we must be clever. The worker thought hard. In the colony, whispers traveled faster than orders. People trusted neighbors more than leaders. If the proof was real, even a single spark could light a fire across the settlement. He straightened his back. Then we spread it ourselves. Quietly, one person at a time, until no one can deny it. The widow's eyes shone faintly in the dim light. That is a dangerous path, but it is the right one. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed nearby. The worker grabbed her arm and pulled her deeper into the shadows. 2 soldiers passed, their lights sweeping across the walls. "Search every corner," one muttered. "The woman has the box. We must retrieve it before anyone sees." The widow's grip tightened on the metal box. Her whisper was sharp. "Do you see now? They fear what is inside. That is why they hunt us." The worker's heartbeat thundered in his chest. The soldier's footsteps faded, but their presence lingered like a storm waiting to break. He turned to the widow. "We don't have much time. We need to know what's on those chips." They slipped into an old storage shed. Its roof half collapsed, its walls cracked. Inside, the worker found a power terminal still working. He connected the first chip, his hands trembling. The small screen flickered to life. Strange symbols appeared. Alien script, shifting lines, broken transmissions. The widow leaned close, her voice hushed but urgent. "Yes, this is it. These are the fleet's messages. Look here. Coordinates, attack plans, the time of their arrival." The worker stared at the lines, not fully understanding, but feeling the weight of the truth. It was all real. The enemy was closer than anyone dared believe. The widow's eyes glistened with tears. "My husband died for this. He tried to warn them and they silenced him. Now it falls to us." The worker felt fear claw at him, but beneath it, something else grew. A fire. He had run from danger all his life. But now danger was everywhere. Running no longer mattered. He closed the box, looking at the widow with steady eyes. "Then we make a choice now. We reveal it, no matter what happens to us." The widow touched his arm, her voice soft but strong. "This is the decision that changes everything. Once we step forward, there is no return." He nodded, the fear still in him, but no longer enough to stop him. "I know, but if we stay quiet, the colony dies in silence. I'd rather speak and fall than keep my head down and watch everyone burn." The widow's lips curved into a faint smile, filled with both sorrow and hope. "Then it begins tonight." Outside, the night deepened. The soldiers still searched, their voices echoing through the empty streets. But in the shadows, a new resolve was born. For the first time, the worker no longer felt like a nameless hand in the machine. For the first time, he carried a purpose bigger than himself. And though fear pressed close, he knew he had made his decision. The morning came heavy with silence. The colony streets looked the same as always, workers rushing to the factories, merchants setting up their stalls, children laughing in corners, but beneath it all, the worker felt a deep tension. He and the widow moved quietly through the shadows, carrying the box of recordings. Every step felt like a countdown. The widow's face was pale, but her eyes were alive with determination. She held the box close to her chest as though it were her last breath. The worker kept glancing around, searching for soldiers. He knew they were hunting them. He knew the moment the council realized the truth was about to break, they would strike without hesitation. They stopped near the central square, the very place where the widow had once shouted and been called mad. The memory of that day burned in the worker's mind. People had laughed at her. Soldiers had silenced her. Now, it was here they would reveal the truth. "This is dangerous," the worker whispered. The widow nodded. "Yes, but it is also the only way." They entered the square. A crowd was already gathering for the council's morning announcement. A large screen lit up at the center, ready to project the council's words. Soldiers stood guard at every corner, their rifles resting but their eyes sharp. The worker's heart pounded. His hands trembled as he connected one of the data chips to the signal console at the edge of the square. The system hummed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered. The crowd gasped as strange symbols appeared. Alien transmissions filled the air, sharp and cold. The widow stepped forward, her voice rising above the noise. "This is the truth you were never meant to see," she cried. "My husband died for these recordings. The enemy is not far. They are here already, watching, waiting." The council knew. They silenced me because I spoke the truth. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Faces turned from shock to confusion, from confusion to fear. The soldiers tensed, moving toward the console. The worker stepped in front of them, his voice loud, his fear swallowed by courage. "You called her crazy. You dragged her through these streets. But she was right. I heard the signal myself. I saw the proof with my own eyes. The council lied to us. They chose silence while death approaches our doors." The soldiers froze, uncertain. The crowd's murmur grew louder, spreading like fire. People pointed at the screen, whispering. Parents pulled their children close. Some shouted, demanding answers. The widow's voice cut through the chaos, strong and steady. "They can call me mad, but they cannot deny what you see. The fleet is real. They will strike, and none of us will survive unless we prepare. This is not madness. This is survival." Suddenly, the screen went black. The council's seal appeared, and a cold voice echoed through the speakers. "These are lies. Do not believe the words of a broken widow. Order must be maintained." The soldiers raised their weapons. The crowd gasped, some stepping back in fear. But the worker shouted again, louder than before. "If it was lies, why fear the truth? Why silence her? Why silence us?" The widow lifted the box high, her hands trembling but her voice filled with fire. "Because they are afraid. Afraid of you knowing the truth. Afraid of losing control. But the truth cannot be buried any longer." A single voice rose from the crowd. Then another. Soon dozens shouted, then hundreds. Their cries drowned out the council's voice. Soldiers looked uncertain, caught between orders and the rising wave of the people. The worker turned to the widow. For the first time he saw hope in her eyes, not sorrow. She had carried her husband's truth alone for so long. Now finally the truth belonged to everyone. The council tried again to silence the square, but the people no longer listened. They had seen the recordings. They had heard the warnings. And once a truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. Alarms suddenly blared across the colony. Red lights flashed. A voice rang out, urgent, panicked. "Unidentified fleet detected near outer orbit. All citizens to prepare for defense." The square fell into silence. The crowd looked to the sky beyond the dome, their fear now turning into grim understanding. The widow had been right all along. She lowered the box, her hands shaking. "It begins," she whispered. The worker placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "But at least now they know. At least now we fight together." For the first time, the widow's tears were not from grief but from relief. Her truth was no longer a lonely cry in the dark. It was a warning carried by the voices of many. As the alarms echoed and the colony stirred into action, the widow stood tall, no longer the woman mocked and silenced, but the one who had given them a chance to survive. The worker stood beside her, no longer just a nameless laborer but someone who had chosen to believe when no one else dared. And together, they faced the sky, ready for what was coming.